Hello everyone and welcome to another Versus video. I am BBD, joined again by
CVM.
And we are ready to battle with some Fate Reforged cards. So for the first time ever, we're going to be battling with some of the new cards from Fate Reforged that we have seen on the spoilers that will hopefully soon be able to impact the standard format.
Yeah, at the time of the recording here, we're a little under halfway through getting all of the cards spoiled.
Yep.
I'm sure by the time it comes out, there's a good chance that we'll have the full spoiler. So don't be too angry if we're missing some of your favorite cards. But as of right now, there's just a handful of some sweet cards, but they're good enough that we want to play with them.
Yeah, so I think that the standard format that we have right now is like just a really good format. It's probably one of the best we've had in a while.
Yeah.
Last year we had like mono black and mono blue kind of dominate for a really long period of time, but this time around it's been really just like all over the place. Like all kinds of decks, all kinds of powerful cards have kind of taken turns dominating, and I'm really excited to see how Fate Reforged will impact that. And one of the cards that Chris and I both think is probably the best card in the set is Ugin. Basically, it's very expensive at 8 mana, but the ability is just unbelievably powerful. Being able to go play Ugin and immediately basically use like a Perilous Vault type effect, where you just exile the entire board, basically just means that like he's going to stick around for another turn unless your opponent has something like Hero's Downfall.
Yeah, I feel like as the format starts to shape itself, I don't want to say change because we don't have a starting point yet, but what's going to end up happening is I think that Ugin is going to rise to the top as like this premier control card, and then the format's going to end up changing itself around that, and I think we're going to see a lot of cards like Stormbreath Dragon as Ugin starts to become more and more popular. So that's definitely one thing to think about as everything changes, but in general, I think Ugin, it's an effect that we haven't seen before on a Planeswalker, and it's very powerful.
Yeah, and I think that Ugin's actually just the most powerful Planeswalker they've ever printed. I think
it's also the most, well, tied for the most expensive, but I think he's still more powerful than Nicol Bolas.
I definitely agree with that. So what he can do is he can -X to exile all non-land permanents with converted mana cost X or less, non-color, colorless.
That have at least a color.
That have at least a color, yeah. So, you know, you're not going to get rid of lands because they're colorless. You're not going to get rid of, you know, artifacts or things like that.
That don't have a color.
Right. I mean, you can still get rid of Whip or, you know, Hammer, Perforos, or things like that. But for the most part, those are the kinds of cards that you're not going to be able to get rid of. But generally speaking, you're going to be able to clear almost everything out of play. And to go along with that, like you can play him, clear the board, and then next turn you can start plussing to kill other things, or even just kill your opponent, or kill their planeswalkers that they play after the fact, or any number of other things. So, yeah, I really think this card is going to be dominant, and one of the shells that I think he fits into is actually Abzan Midrange, which may seem weird to want to play an 8-mana planeswalker in Abzan Midrange, but this is one of the decks that can get to a late enough game where Ugin is good, and also doesn't play a strategy that's anti-synergistic with Ugin. So, for example, the Whip decks and also Green Devotion decks can both generate 8 mana fairly easily, but both of their strategies are the kind of strategies that like Ugin's really good against. Not necessarily the strategy where you want to be playing your own Ugins.
Yep.
Like, you want to be using Ugin to exile Whips and Hornet Queen tokens and all kinds of things like Doomwake Giants. Like, it's not as good if you're playing those cards yourself. Whereas here, like, you know, at that point in the game, like, Courser's already generated a lot of advantage. Like, Sylvan Caryatid doesn't really matter anymore if we have 8 mana. You know, Siege Rhino is good regardless. You know, things like that. And then even some of the other planeswalkers we have, like Elspeth, generally speaking, our opponent's probably not going to have anything that costs 6 or more in play. We can probably play, like, Ugin into an Elspeth and -5, you know, or something, and get rid of everything cheaper than Elspeth, and then keep our Elspeth around, too. So I think that this deck has a lot of synergy with Ugin. The only real fear is, like, can we get to 8 mana to cast it before we die? And I guess that's, you know, what we're going to find out with this video is, can we actually do that or not? And to facilitate that, there's like 26 lands and 4 Caryatids, 4 Coursers, and 2 Read the Bones that are going to really help us keep drawing lands and keep hitting our land drops all the way up to 8.
And we also have Scry lands, so it's something that I feel like as a Magic community and competitive players, we take for granted just the effect that Scrylands have on Magic the Gathering.
Yes.
It's going to be very apparent once Theros block rotates and they're no longer there. I feel like there's going to be a lot more mulligans that will be happening, a lot more people dying to Mana Screw because they didn't mulligan. But the effect that the Scrylands have on letting a deck like this play a card like Ugin is giant. Like, I don't think that you'd be able to play it in this shell and be happy about it unless we had access to the Scrylands.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like, they're kind of the unsung heroes of Standard you don't really talk about, but they really do a lot of work. And even Read the Bones being able to scry, too. Like, you know, if I Read the Bones on turn 3 and there's an Ugin there and I don't have any more lands in my hand, I get to put it on the bottom of my deck. I don't have to draw it. Same with, like, Courser and Fetch lands, too. There's a lot of way to manipulate your draws in this deck that can really help, kind of like how you can play cards in Legacy sometimes that maybe are situational because you have access to Brainstorm or Force of Will or things like that. You can kind of do that a little bit in Standard, too, with, like, Scrylands and Read the Bones and stuff like that.
Yep.
The only other card that I'm playing that's new in this deck is Crux of Fate, which has the ability to kill all dragons or all non-dragons. It's basically end hostilities, essentially. Like, it is occasionally a little bit worse, but I think that overall I like it more than end hostilities in this deck because I think that there are going to be some situations where your opponent has a Stormbreath Dragon, and you just want to kill their dragon but keep around your Courser, your Rhinos, or things like that. And I like having the option to be able to do that with this card. So I think that there's a little bit of upside there. And we could also be playing some of our own dragons, too. Like, there's the new green-white dragon, you know, the 5/5 dragon, and things like that that are definitely, like, potential playables in a shell like this. So
it's also important to note that the biggest upside on Crux of Fate is that it doesn't have white-white in its casting cost.
That, too, yeah.
This deck could play End Hostilities if you wanted to, technically, but it wouldn't be as effective as Crux of Fate. This is the type of card that when you want to cast it on turn 5 and you can't, you're just going to die. And it goes along with our Bile Blights and our Hero's Downfall. So that's the biggest upgrade, is that it does a Poor Damnation impersonation, but just simply being black and not white makes it very good for this deck.
Yeah. As for the rest of the deck, it's a pretty straightforward Abzan Midrange deck. I don't think that we really need to talk too much about it. This is a deck that we've seen really just be popular throughout the entirety of Standard. But basically, yeah, I just want to talk about Ugin and Crux of Fate and how I think those two cards are going to impact Standard. And now I guess we can look at the sideboard and see what we have there as well. All right, so here's the sideboard for the deck, and I don't want to dwell a lot on these cards because, again, they're the same kind of cards we've been seeing for a long time. But I want to hit on a couple of things that I think might change with the new format. One is I think the stock of Drown and Sorrow goes way up because, I mean, it's already great, but because of the power of like Soulfire Grandmaster and
Monastery Mentor.
Yeah, Monastery Mentor, I think having access to Drown is going to be crucial for decks like this to be able to hang with those kinds of decks. Another card is I think Glare of Heresy is going to get better too, again, because of like Monastery Mentor and cards like that. I think the value of Glare of Heresy is definitely going to go up. It's already probably the best sideboard card in Standard, and I think it only gets better from here.
Yeah.
To the point where maybe it's even reasonable considering main decking it, depending on how the format shifts.
I mean, most of the decks it's going to hit something. So.
Yeah. And then lastly, the card I want to talk about is Nissa, who right now is kind of underwhelming in Standard, not particularly good against most decks. However, I think that if Ugin starts to take over the format, Nissa's stock goes way up because the lands that Nissa turns into 4/4s can't be destroyed by Ugin's -X ability.
Yeah,
and
that's
actually really huge. Nissa's right now the best card in the format against blue-black control because of Perilous Vault and the ability to get around that with, you know, lands not dying to Perilous Vault. And Nissa attacks Ugin in the exact same way. So I think that we could see like a huge rise in Nissa as well.
For sure. It is important to remember, though, that Crux of Fate does kill the lands because they are not dragons.
Maybe they...
So when you choose non-dragons, it hits the lands.
Unless you Nissa and Mutavault. Ooh,
that's tricky.
Not legal in Standard, but tricky.
I don't even want to know what happens when you activate it.
Yeah, I don't even know.
Is it a 2/2? Is it a 4/4?
I don't even want to know.
I don't even know.
All right, well, anyway, that is the deck tech for Abzan Midrange. We'll be back with CVMs next, and hopefully we get some good games and get to see some of these sweet new cards.